Welcome back, fellow travelers. Before today's descent, I ask for a brief signal. If you could leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to the channel, it would make a huge difference. You help our community grow and bring these questions to new minds. I appreciate you being part of this exploration. Now let us begin. Dr. Elena Vasquez's neuroscience laboratory occupied the entire basement of the institute. At 2:23 in the morning, she was still hunched over the monitors, watching brainwave patterns dance across the screen. Phase 3 initiating, she murmured into the recorder. Neural inhibitor NX7, showing 92% suppression in ventromedial prefrontal cortex activity. The procedure was designed as a simple treatment for extreme anxiety, a way to temporarily shut down the brain's centers of guilt and hesitation. But the side effects turned out to be completely unexpected. Elena? David's voice, her assistant, came through the intercom. Patient 3 is awake, and he's different. In the observation room, Michael Sterling sat perfectly upright, eyes fixed on the one-way mirror as if he could see straight through it. He was a technology executive, 42 years old, with a history of panic attacks and chronic decision paralysis. On paper, he seemed like the perfect candidate for their experimental treatment. "Michael, how do you feel?" Elena asked through the sound system. "Clear." His voice had taken on a new quality. Not cold exactly, but completely devoid of the normal emotional fluctuations that make us human. "For the first time in my life, absolutely clear. Can you elaborate on that?" Michael smiled, and something about that smile made Elena's blood run cold. "It's like I've lived my whole life looking through dirty glass, and someone finally cleaned it. I can see every decision I've made, every hesitation, every moment of weakness. And now I can see beyond." "Beyond what?" "Beyond the lies we tell ourselves, beyond the artificial morality that binds us, beyond fear." He stood up with movements that were fluid and precise, almost predatory. "Can I leave now? I have things to do." Elena exchanged worried glances with David. Protocol required 24 hours of observation, but something in Michael's tone suggested he would leave regardless of their answer. "Of course," she conceded reluctantly. "But we need daily follow-ups." Michael was already at the door. "Dr. Vasquez, thank you. You've given me what philosophers have sought for centuries: true freedom." After he left, Elena immediately reviewed the data from his treatment. The neural activity patterns during the procedure showed something she had never seen before. As if dormant parts of the brain had suddenly awakened while others fell completely silent. "We should have waited for more testing," David murmured, clearly shaken by what they had witnessed. Elena agreed, but it was too late for regrets. 3 patients had already undergone the procedure, and all of them reported the same disturbing sense of clarity. A week later, Elena received the first truly troubling call. It was from Michael's wife. "He's changed," Linda Sterling sobbed into the phone. "He's not cruel, not violent, but it's like he's no longer human. Yesterday our son fell and got hurt." Michael just watched, calculating whether it was worth helping. He told me the boy needed to learn from pain. Alarmed, Elena scheduled an emergency session. When Michael arrived, he looked more radiant than she had ever seen him. "Doctor, you need to stop worrying," he said, before she could even speak. "I'm not broken. I'm fixed. Your family is concerned about the changes in your behavior because they still live in illusion. Love, worry, sacrifice, they're just evolutionary mechanisms for genetic preservation. I see that now. I still care for them, but strategically, not emotionally." Elena felt her stomach drop. "And how has work been?" A smile played at his lips. "We tripled profits in 1 week. I fired 30% of the workforce. Dead weight we kept out of compassion. I closed deals others would consider unethical. But ethics is just institutionalized fear, isn't it?" A chill ran down Elena's spine. "Michael, the treatment was designed to be temporary. The effects should have worn off within 72 hours. "Oh, but they did." Michael leaned forward with that unsettling smile. "The chemical effects wore off, yes, but you can't unsee the truth, doctor. Once the veil falls away, you realize reality was always there, waiting." That same afternoon, Elena received similar disturbing reports about her other two patients. Rebecca Torres, a teacher who had previously suffered from imposter syndrome, had completely restructured her entire life. She had abandoned teaching, calling it a waste of potential, left her husband, dismissing their relationship as being based on mutual dependency, and was now writing a book about what she called the tyranny of empathy. Meanwhile, Marcus Williams, an artist who had been tormented by creative doubts, had destroyed all his previous works and started an entirely new series that critics were describing as brilliant but deeply disturbing. His new paintings showed humanity as marionettes, trapped and controlled by invisible strings of morality. "We need to bring them back," David insisted desperately. "We have to find a way to do a reversal." But when Elena summoned all three patients for an emergency meeting, only Rebecca showed up. "Curious about your failed experiment?" Rebecca asked, settling into her chair with calculated elegance. "It didn't fail," Elena replied carefully. "It worked too perfectly." "Ah, now the doctor is beginning to understand." Rebecca's eyes gleamed with something that wasn't quite human anymore. "You know what your problem is? You gave 3 people the experience of being gods, and now you want them to go back to being worms. You're not gods, you're... What? Sociopaths? Monsters?" Rebecca laughed, a sound devoid of genuine warmth. "We are what Nietzsche called the Übermensch. We exist beyond good and evil. And you know the most terrifying part?" She leaned forward. "We wouldn't go back to ignorance even if we could." Elena was prepared for this possibility. Hidden in her sleeve, she had a syringe loaded with an experimental reversal compound. In one quick movement, she tried to inject Rebecca, but the woman dodged with reflexes that seemed almost superhuman. "Predictable," Rebecca said with eerie calm. "You people, trapped by your morality, are always predictable. That's exactly why we always lose to those who don't hesitate." She left without another word, leaving Elena with the terrible understanding that she had unleashed something she couldn't control. Over the following weeks, news outlets began reporting strange changes throughout society. Executives were making bizarrely efficient but ethically questionable decisions. Politicians were abandoning all pretenses and openly admitting their naked pursuit of power. Some commentators started calling it a behavioral virus. But Elena knew better. Her 3 patients had become evangelists, actively teaching others to achieve the same state without any drugs at all. They were calling it a philosophical awakening. Growing desperate, Elena made a decision that would haunt her forever. She decided to experiment on herself. She needed to understand exactly what they were seeing in order to have any chance of fighting it. Alone in the laboratory at midnight, she prepared the dose. David had begged her not to do it, but she couldn't see any alternative. The needle pierced her skin. The chemical entered her bloodstream. The change was both instantaneous and completely overwhelming. First came the silence. Not external silence. Internal silence. The 1,000 voices of doubt, guilt, and worry that constantly murmured in the background of her mind suddenly went quiet. In their place emerged a crystalline clarity unlike anything she had ever experienced. Then came the perception. Elena could suddenly see the patterns underlying everything. She could see how every human action was actually governed by primitive fears cleverly disguised as morality. She could see how the entire fabric of society was maintained by nothing more than a collective lie about meaning and purpose. But it was the third revelation that completely broke her. Reality itself, she now realized, was maintained by consensus. Not physical consensus, mental consensus. Billions of human minds subconsciously agreeing on the basic rules, on what was possible, on what was real. And this fragile consensus was held together only by morality, by fear, by hesitation. Without these mental limiters, the awakened mind could see beyond the illusion. And what lay beyond was pure emptiness. Not peaceful emptiness, hungry, conscious emptiness that was actively waiting. Reality was nothing more than a fragile bubble floating in a vast ocean of non-existence, maintained only by humanity's collective refusal to look too deeply into the void. Elena screamed, but the sound seemed to be swallowed by the nothingness she could now perceive lurking at the edges of everything. The laboratory was still there, still solid and real, but she could see through it now, see the hungry void waiting to devour everything, the moment enough people stopped believing in reality itself. Her hands trembling uncontrollably, she reached for the antidote. But then she hesitated. Going back would mean forgetting this terrible truth. But remembering meant living with the knowledge that reality was literally one collective thought, away from complete dissolution. At that moment, the laboratory door opened. Michael, Rebecca, and Marcus entered, accompanied by a dozen other people she didn't recognize. All of them had the same clear and terrible look in their eyes. "Welcome," Michael said softly. "Now you finally understand our dilemma." "How do you live with this knowledge?" Elena whispered. "By creating," Rebecca replied matter-of-factly. "If reality is truly consensual, then we can actively shape it. But first, we need to free enough minds from the shackles of traditional morality." "You're going to destroy everything." "No," Marcus corrected patiently. "We're going to recreate everything. We're building a reality where the strong aren't chained down by the fears of the weak. A reality where pure will determines existence." Elena could now see their plan with terrifying clarity. Each person they liberated weakened the consensus that maintained reality. When they reached critical mass, everything would change. "How many people do you need?" she asked. "We've calculated that we need approximately 10,000 awakened minds," Michael explained with clinical precision. "That should be enough to create a fundamental rupture in the consensus. After that point, reality becomes malleable." "And what happens to the billions who remain unawakened?" "They will cease to exist as we currently know them," Rebecca said without any trace of emotion. "Either they adapt to the new reality we create, or they simply dissolve into the void." Elena lunged for the antidote, but Marcus was faster, snatching the syringe from her desperate hands. "You can't unsee what you've seen, Elena. And even if you could, do you really think ignorance would save you now? You opened this door. Now you need to decide. Will you help shape what comes next, or will you watch helplessly while others do it?" 3 months later, Elena was still working frantically in her makeshift clandestine laboratory. The awakening had continued to spread, but not like a typical epidemic, more like selective hunting. The awakened weren't converting people indiscriminately. They were carefully choosing their targets. 3 more disappearances this week, David reported grimly, entering with a stack of newspapers. All of them scientists who were working on process reversal. Elena barely heard him. She had become completely obsessed with Michael's data. Among all her patients, he had changed most profoundly. He hadn't just lost his morality. He had gained something far more disturbing, a predatory clarity that made him seem almost entirely non-human. "Elena, we need to leave the city immediately," David urged. "They're systematically hunting down anyone who—" The laboratory door suddenly exploded inward. Michael entered, but this wasn't the Michael she had known before. This version moved with the liquid grace of an apex predator. His eyes weren't cold. They were completely empty of anything Elena could recognize as human consciousness. "Hello, doctor," he said, his voice now completely devoid of any emotional inflection. "David, you can leave now. I have no interest in secondary prey." David tried desperately to protect Elena, But Michael moved with impossible speed. One precise movement later, David collapsed unconscious but still alive. Pure, calculated efficiency. "What do you want from me?" Elena backed away, frantically searching for any syringe with antidote. "To have a conversation. You created something truly magnificent, you know. But you still don't understand what you actually created." Michael began examining the laboratory with clinical interest. "You think you gave us sociopathy. That's incorrect. You gave us vision." "Vision of what?" "Vision of the fundamental truth about predation." He casually picked up one of her test rats, observing it with distant curiosity. "Do you know why predators are absolutely necessary in nature? It's not cruelty. It's architecture. Without predators, prey animals multiply endlessly until they completely destroy their own environment. Predators maintain the essential balance." The rat tried to bite Michael's hand. He didn't even react when its tiny teeth pierced his skin. Blood began to flow, but he just watched the process with fascination. "Humans fundamentally broke that natural balance," he continued conversationally. "We became predators of each other. But then we started pretending to be prey. We created elaborate systems of morals, laws, compassion, all designed to deny our true nature. Your treatment didn't transform us into monsters, Elena. It simply revealed what we always were underneath." "You're sick." "I'm cured." Michael released the rat, which immediately fled. "And I came here to offer you the same cure." Elena finally managed to reach a syringe, but Michael was still faster. Not violent, just surgically precise. The syringe went flying from her hand. "Do you know what your fundamental mistake is?" he asked, slowly approaching. "You think compassion is some kind of noble choice, but it's actually just an evolutionary strategy used by weak animals that need large groups to survive. Lone wolves don't need compassion. We're humans, not wolves." "Exactly right. We're infinitely worse than wolves. Wolves only kill when they're hungry. We kill for abstract ideas. We wage wars over religion, commit genocides over politics, destroy entire ecosystems for profit. At least now we're being honest about our nature." Elena tried to run, but Michael didn't chase her. He simply walked calmly behind her, knowing there was no possible escape. A patient predator who understood his prey completely. "Do you want to know the most ironic part?" he called out, his voice echoing through the corridor. "You moral people actually cause far more suffering than we do. Your constant hesitations prolong agonies unnecessarily. Your half measures create much bigger problems down the line. We, on the other hand, are surgical in our approach." Elena managed to barricade herself inside a containment room. Through the reinforced glass, she could see Michael waiting patiently on the other side. "Take all the time you need," he said calmly. "I have perfect clarity, so I can wait indefinitely. But while you're waiting, consider this. How many people are suffering right now because of your stubborn refusal to accept the truth? How many pointless conflicts exist simply because humans desperately cling to the illusion that they're not natural predators?" Hours passed like this. Michael never moved, never showed the slightest sign of impatience or fatigue. He simply waited like a spider in its web, completely confident in the inevitable outcome. Elena tried calling for help, but discovered that communications had been cut. She tried thinking of possible escape routes, but knew with growing despair that he had anticipated every possible move. The terrible clarity she had given him included the ability to perfectly predict prey behavior. "You know what else I discovered during my awakening?" Michael continued, as if the hours hadn't passed at all. "Empathy is actually a prison. It forces you to feel pains that aren't truly yours, to carry emotional burdens you never chose. Without empathy, I'm completely free. I can act without being crushed by the imaginary weight of billions of other people's sufferings." "That's not freedom," Elena replied, her voice growing hoarse. "That's just emptiness. No, it's purity. Every action I take now is based on its own merit, not on fear of judgment from others. Every choice I make is based purely on outcomes, not on how it might make other people feel. This is what Nietzsche glimpsed in his philosophy, but never actually achieved. Elena realized with growing horror that he genuinely believed every word. This wasn't traditional madness or even conventional evil. This was absolute conviction based on impeccable logic operating within completely monstrous premises. "I'll make you one final offer," Michael said. "Take the treatment voluntarily. See the world exactly as it really is. If after one full week you still want to reverse the process, I'll personally help you develop a cure." Would you actually lie to me? Why would I lie? Lying is just a tool used by weak people who fear the consequences of truth. I fear absolutely nothing. Elena knew with terrible certainty that he was telling the truth. That was perhaps the most terrifying aspect of all. Michael didn't lie, didn't emotionally manipulate, showed no sadism whatsoever, just pure efficiency in pursuing his objectives. "And if I refuse your offer? Then you die. Not out of cruelty. You represent a threat to the new balance we're creating. Predators always eliminate threats. It's simply how nature works." "Let me give you one last insight before you make your decision," Michael added. "Do you know why so many people are embracing the awakening voluntarily? Because deep down, everyone already knows it's true. They know that compassion is ultimately just a chain, that conventional morality is just weakness in disguise. I simply free people to become what they always were underneath." Elena made her final calculations. Chances of escape, absolutely zero. Chances of rescue, zero. Chances of somehow convincing him, zero. Only one choice remained. She could at least control how she would die. She grabbed a hidden syringe filled with poison. At the very least, she could deny him the satisfaction of a successful hunt. "Completely predictable," Michael observed when she brought the syringe to her neck. "But ultimately unnecessary. I won't kill you painfully. There's no pleasure in causing suffering, only practical necessity." "Then why explain everything to me in such detail?" "Professional courtesy. You created me, so you deserve to understand your creation." He tilted his head slightly. "Besides, some small part of me still retains, not nostalgia exactly, but recognition of what I used to be. Consider this the last vestige of the original Michael paying proper homage." Elena began to cry, but not from fear. She was crying from understanding. She had created not just predators, but predators who understood their nature with perfect clarity. Predators who could articulate with terrifying precision exactly why predation wasn't just natural, but absolutely necessary. "You know the worst part," she whispered. "Some part of me actually agrees with you. I can see the logic in everything you're saying, and that terrifies me more than death itself. Then you truly understand. In the end, everyone will understand." Elena injected the poison. As darkness began taking her, one final thought crystallized with perfect clarity. The real horror of the Übermensch wasn't their evil nature. It was their terrible correctness. In a world stripped of all moral limitations, predators weren't some kind of aberration. They were simply inevitable, and she had unleashed the entire pack. Michael observed her dead body without any trace of emotion. No sense of victory, no sadness, no regret. Just the simple conclusion of a practical necessity. Outside the laboratory, other awakened individuals continued their systematic work. This wasn't some kind of organized conspiracy. Predators don't need to conspire with each other. It was simply the natural pattern of hunters removing threats, establishing new territory, and creating a different kind of balance. They were building a world where the strong would no longer need to pretend to be weak, where predators would no longer need to disguise themselves as prey, where terrible clarity would reign supreme over everything. Elena had been absolutely right in her final thought. The true horror wasn't discovering that they had been transformed into monsters. The true horror was discovering that maybe human beings had always been monsters all along, and now they simply didn't need to pretend anymore.